Hi, everyone. Welcome to SCI 5083, Science Instruction for Elementary Teacher Preparation. My name is Kelly Hoven, and I am super excited to get to work with you in this course. Science education is my passion. So I'm happy to get to work with you as we look at some best practices for science education. I like to make videos for some of the assignments and different courses because I like very clear and explicit instructions, and sometimes that's not what you get, and I don't get to fix the instructions in the courses. So I may make some videos to help make things a little easier, or to give you some tips to make things easier, or some places to look, that sort of thing. So that's what I'm going to do for you here for assignment one. If you are not currently looking at the instructions for assignment one, grab that and take a look so you can follow along as I go through the instructions for what we're doing. So for this first assignment, we're looking at best practices in science education, which is huge. So let me tell you how you can narrow it down in a way that's going to make your upcoming assignments easier. Because if you can get familiar with a couple of concepts now in this first assignment, you're going to use those concepts because we tell you you have to in the assignments 2, 3, 4, and then when you do your reflection in 5. So let me give you some suggestions. So step one of the directions says, using online resources, which should say using online scholarly resources, locate 10 to 15 best practices in science instruction. Y'all, do 10. There's no benefit to doing more than 10. Do 10, move on. They do give you some websites there. I don't feel like those are particularly helpful, but let me give you some other things you might want to look at instead. It's really important that you're familiar with the next generation science standards in this course. So I would say go to the Next Gen Science Standards website and get familiar with why those standards are written the way they are. You can get 10 best practices right out of Next Gen. A lot of states have adopted next gen the way they are. The other states have adopted a modified version. So if next gen doesn't sound familiar to you, your state's probably using a modified version, called it something else, but it's still based on next gen. I'm in Florida, which is the only state that's doing their own thing. Don't get me started. So you want to be familiar with next gen. You have to use them for the upcoming assignments. Sorry, there's this payer situation. Okay, so I would go to the Next Gen Science Standard site and see if you can get best practices right off of there. Other things you want to be familiar with for this course will be inquiry-based learning, so you can get some best practices related to that. The 5 E's of inquiry-based learning will be helpful, or the science and engineering practices from the Next Gen Science Standards. We have to integrate computer science later. I'll talk about that later. But understanding the science and engineering practices of NextGen will help you when we move into that as you're doing your lesson planning. So again, you could use all kinds of best practices, but I would focus on those areas because you need to know them for the remaining assignments. Here's what I would not do for this assignment. I would not go to ChatGPT and put in 10 best practices in science teaching. I'll tell you why. You get stuff that's random, you get stuff that's out of date. So every semester I get somebody who writes about how great the scientific method is. Nope, not a best practice. So I would not do that. There are times when AI is helpful. It is not helpful for this assignment because you're not going to get things that lay the groundwork for what's to come. So I wouldn't use it here. There are other places we could use it in the course. We'll talk about that later. So there's step one. I'm going to jump down to step 5 because it doesn't really tell you what to do with these 10 things until step 5. So as you get your 10 best practices in step 5, you'll see that you need a narrative description of each practice and how research supports them. So keep in mind, these are evidence-based practices. So you might be able to just off the top of your head say, hey, here are some best practices. And that's great, but that's not what we need here because it's a graduate school paper and they're all research-based. So we want to make sure that you're using scholarly resources to be able to cite each of these best practices that some research said it's a best practice. So that's why using like the Next Gen Science Standards site, that is a scholarly resource. So already you're making that part of the assignment easier as well. So a teacher blog is not going to be a scholarly resource or research based. So make sure you're using research based sources. that you are meeting those requirements. Make sure you have in-text citations as well as references for your best practices. Okay, now we have our best practices. That's just the first part. What do you do with them? Going back up to step two. In step two, you design a 10-question interview survey. The question should help you examine how a school's science practices or teacher science practices align to the best practices you researched. So this is where you'll interview an elementary school teacher. Okay. Step three tells you what your how to set up your data table for the interview. So it says to use 4 columns, best practice. So those 10 best practices now go into your table. Your survey question. Technically, you can write whatever survey question you want for each practice, but your survey question could be the same thing over and over. So for each best practice, you could say, are you familiar with this practice? And how do you use this practice? So that you can get the teacher to just reflect on, are these best practices that they use or not? So don't feel like you need a different question for everything. Teacher response and observations. I mean, you might not have any observations, but whatever the teacher's responses are to your question can go there. And then there's this kind of weird fourth column, areas of strength and improvement. I mean, that really depends on how they answered each question. So for this one, the teacher might indicate, hey, I'm familiar with that practice. I tried it 3 years ago. It didn't really work, and here's why. Okay, you could put that in that column. Or I just started using this practice and this year, and I don't, really know yet, but here's, what's going well. So I would fill in that column with like whatever makes sense based on your line of questioning with the teacher. Don't feel like you have to then ask them about areas of strength and improvement. That's kind of a weird column in my opinion. So you put in there what you will based on how your conversation with the teacher goes. And then that's your interview. In step four, you're going to synthesize. Now, this is a little tip. It says synthesize the last column of the table. Well, again, that's a weird column. They might not have anything in it. So I would synthesize like the results of the interview. Um, so which best practices were discussed? How did the teacher describe? So see how that came from really the third column? So for step four, just synthesize. Like what now you need to tell me, you gave me a table. Now tell me what the table says as you synthesize the information. And then note that in step five, it says you need a summary of how the school's best practices compare to the best practices you researched. So I would go from that synthesizing what you learned from the teacher's interview into and then just summarize it. So they use none of these best practices. They use these particular best practices. Give me a quick little. Make sure you hit summary because summary's in the rubric. So I have to see a summary, and then write a conclusion. So a conclusion is where you can reflect on the whole process. So make sure that you have narrative there. So you need an introduction, a summary, and a conclusion because those are all in the rubric. Okay. And that's what makes up your paper. So, speaking of the rubric, make sure you check that rubric as you go so that you have everything in there. In particular, that you have the data table, that you have the survey, data the survey, the data table, a summary, conclusion, and then there's a kind of a broad APA part of the rubric. I'll post another announcement with some APA tips to make things super easy for you. If you want, I always assume people want to get better at APA. You might not. It's fine. So I mean, I do need to grade on that. So I will give you resources to make things easy for APA purposes. So check out my APA announcement because there's some good stuff in there. But that's also where I'll be looking to make sure that you have an in-text citation and that you have a references page and so forth. But we have resources for all that. No worries. So okay, that was a lot, but there's a lot in this assignment. So please let me know if you have any questions. I try to answer questions quickly during the day. Of course, I have a daytime job as well, but I try to watch for questions all day long so I can get back to you quickly. There's a lot for us to do in this term, and I will be here to help you through it. But please reach out if you need any clarification, and good luck on your first assignment. You got this.